Hi there, and welcome to this day in history for December 27th. December 27th is the 361st day of the year in the Gregorian calendar, with 4 days remaining to the end of the year. Sanskrit is an ancient Indian language that has given many words to English directly, such as orange, nirvana, and mantra, and also indirectly, such as guru, khat, and jute, by way of its daughter languages, or by way of another language which borrowed them from Sanskrit, such as Zen, Candy, or Lilac. For the next few days, we're going to explore words that have their origins in Sanskrit. Today's word is Brahmin. Brahmin is a noun that means member of the upper class, having wealth, social status, and political power. From Sanskrit Brahmin, a member of the priestly class, the highest of the 4 classes, from Brahma, the creator of the universe in Hinduism. Earliest documented use is 1481. Before we go further, I want to remind you that links to my research are included in the show notes. So if you wonder where I got this information or that information, check out those show notes for links. And with that, we're going to start in the year 537, when the construction of the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople was completed. Hagia Sophia, the Church of the Holy Wisdom, was built in 537 AD. This was before the Middle Ages, and it's famous in particular for its massive dome. It was the world's largest building and an engineering marvel of its time. It's considered the epitome of Byzantine architecture and is said to have changed the history of architecture. Today is the birthday of German mathematician, astronomer, and astrologer Johan Keppler. He's a key figure in the 17th century scientific revolution, best known for his laws of planetary motion and his books Astronomia Nova, Harmonices Mundi, and Epitome Astronomiae Copernicanae. These works have also provided one of the foundation for Newton's theory of universal gravitation. He was born in 1571. French chemist and microbiologist Louis Pasteur was born on this day in 1822. He kind of figured out that germs cause disease and was able to begin to implement changes in hospital hygiene practices that really saved a lot of lives. On this day in 1831, Charles Darwin embarked on his journey aboard the HMS Beagle, during which he began to formulate his theory of evolution. And golly, just yesterday we were talking about Stephen Austin, the father of Texas, the founder of Texas, after whom the city and capital Austin, Texas is named. And of course, most of those events took place in the 1820s. But it is that in December of 1836, he caught a cold that he just couldn't shake. And it got worse and worse. And before you know it, he had pneumonia. Back then, there wasn't anything doctors could do for him, and he died on December 27th, 1836, and he was only 43. On this day in 1845, ether was used as an anesthetic in childbirth for the first time by Dr. Crawford Long in Jefferson, Georgia. Murder and mayhem have been the subject of many popular songs over the years, though more often than not the tales around which such songs revolve tend to be wholly fictional. Johnny Cash never shot a man in Reno, for example, and the events related in such famous story songs as El Paso and I Shot the Sheriff never actually took place. The same cannot be said, however, about Stagger Lee, a song that has drifted from the facts somewhat over the course of its many lives in the last 100+ years, but a song inspired by an actual murder that took place on December 27, 1895, in St. Louis, Missouri, in a bar room around an argument involving a man named Billy and another named Stag Lee. In the year 1900, Prohibitionist Carrie Nation smashed up a bar at the Carrie Hotel in Wichita, Kansas, causing several $1,000s worth of damage and landing in jail. She was released shortly after the incident, and she became famous then for carrying a hatchet and wrecking saloons as part of her anti-alcohol crusade. Too bad Al-Anon hadn't come along back then. They might have been able to help her figure out a more effective way to deal with it. On December 27th of 1904, the play Peter Pan opened in the Duke of York's Theatre in London. This was a play written by J.M. Barrie. In 1927, Kern and Hammerstein's musical play Showboat, considered to be the first true American musical play, opened at the Ziegfeld Theatre on Broadway. On December 27th of 1932, Radio City Music Hall, the showplace of the nation, opened. At the height of the Great Depression, thousands turned out for the opening of Radio City Music Hall, a magnificent Art Deco theater in New York City. Radio City Music Hall was designed as a palace for the people, a place of beauty where ordinary people could see high-quality entertainment. Since its 1932 opening, more than 300 million people have gone to Radio City to enjoy movies, stage shows, concerts, and special events. Not at the same time, though. On December 27, 1941, the Federal Office of Price Administration initiated its first rationing program in support of the American effort in World War II. It mandated that from that day on, no driver would be permitted to own more than 5 automobile tires. President Roosevelt established the Office of Price Administration and Civilian Supply in April of 1941 to stabilize prices and rents and prevent unwarranted increases in them, to prevent profiteering, hoarding, and speculation, to assure that defense appropriations were not dissipated by excessive prices, to protect those with fixed incomes from undue impairment of their living standards, to assist in securing adequate production, and to prevent a post-emergency collapse of values. The OPA, its name was streamlined in August of 1941, was responsible for 2 types of rationing programs. The first limited the purchase of certain commodities such as tires, cars, metal typewriters, bicycles, stoves, rubber shoes, to people who had demonstrated a particular need for them. The second limited the quantity of things like butter, coffee, sugar, cooking fat, gasoline, and non-rubber shoes, which every citizen was allowed to buy. As a result, of course, the black market flourished. Studies estimated that 25% of all purchases during the war were illegal. Japanese occupations in the Far East had made it impossible to get rubber from plantations in the Dutch East Indies, and what little rubber was available went straight to airplane and munitions factories. Because no one had yet figured out how to make really high-quality artificial rubber, the OPA especially wanted to encourage people to care for the automobile tires they already had. Ads urged people to put less wear on their tires by driving in carpools. One of their mottos was, "When you ride alone, you ride with Hitler." Another announced, "To win this war, more people have got to enjoy riding in fewer cars." To conserve rubber and gasoline, the national victory speed limit was 35 miles per hour. 35. Meanwhile, scrap rubber drives collected old raincoats, garden hoses, and bathing caps. Rationing and recycling, collecting items like tin cans and used cooking fat for reuse, was a way to make ordinary citizens feel like they were a part of what one ad called a fighting unit on the home front. During the war, the OPA rationed almost every commodity it could think of. But by the end of 1945, only 2 rationing programs, for sugar and for rubber tires, remained in place. The rationing finally ended on December 31st, 1945. And we might mention that again on the 31st. We'll see. On December 27, 1944, FDR seized control of Montgomery Ward. Roosevelt ordered his Secretary of War to seize properties belonging to the Montgomery Ward Company because the company refused to comply with the labor agreement. In an effort to avert strikes in critical war support industries, Roosevelt created the National War Labor Board in 1942. The board negotiated settlements between management and workers to avoid shutdowns in production that might cripple the war effort. During the war, well-known retailer and manufacturer Montgomery Ward had supplied the Allies with everything from tractors to auto parts to workmen's clothing, items deemed as important to the war effort as bullets and ships. However, Montgomery Ward Chairman Sewell Avery refused to comply with the terms of 3 different collective bargaining agreements with the United Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union hammered out between 1943 and 1944. In April of 1944, after Sewell refused a second board order, Roosevelt called out the Army National Guard to seize the company's main plant in Chicago. Sewell himself had to be carried out of his office by National Guard troops. By December of that year, Roosevelt was fed up with Sewell's obstinacy and disrespect for the government's authority. The uber-capitalist Sewell's favorite insult was to call someone a New Dealer, a direct reference to Roosevelt's Depression-era politics. On December 27th, Roosevelt ordered the Secretary of War to seize Montgomery Ward's plants and facilities in New York, Michigan, California, Illinois, Colorado, and Oregon. In his announcement that day, Roosevelt emphasized that the government would not tolerate any interference with war production in this critical hour. He issued a stern warning to labor unions and industry management alike. Strikes in wartime cannot be condoned, whether they're strikes by workers against their employers or strikes by employers against their government. Sewell took the fight to federal court but lost. For much of the 20th century, Montgomery Ward, founded in 1872, reigned as one of the country's largest department store and mail-order retail chains. Heavy competition from Walmart, Target, and similar discount stores forced the company to close all of its stores in 2000, although it retains a catalog and internet presence. Now, when I found that little factoid in research, I thought, what? I couldn't believe it. So I looked it up, and yeah, Montgomery Ward's does indeed have an online store. I've placed a link in the show notes if you want to check that out. 1968, the Apollo program, Apollo 8, splashes down in the Pacific Ocean, ending the first orbital manned mission to the moon. 1979, Soviets take over in Afghanistan. In an attempt to stabilize the turbulent political situation in Afghanistan, the Soviet Union sent 75,000 troops to enforce the installation of Babrak Karmal as the new leader of the nation. The new government and the imposing Soviet presence, however, had little success in putting down anti-government rebels. Thus began nearly 10 years of an agonizing, destructive, and ultimately fruitless Soviet military intervention in Afghanistan. And I think that's going to do it for us today. As always, links to my research are included in the show notes. Thank you so much for watching. Give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed this video. Consider subscribing if you haven't already, and feel free to share this video. While you're here, check out my other channel, 8 Susquehanna. There's a link to that in the show notes as well. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time. Okay. Back to work. Okie dokie, Smokey. Let's just rearrange that a little bit. Just read it like it's written. That's not the way I like to tell it anyway. We don't need all those words. Hope I pronounced that right. Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? She's not a man. This is why I don't do live shows.